Imagine a fortress designed to kill gods, sealed by blood magic and ancient sorcery, where any intruder should instantly turn to ash. Now, imagine opening those deadly doors to find not an assassin, but a smiling baby girl playing with a golden thread. This is not a fairy tale. This is the night the undisputed king of vampires met the one creature capable of breaching his defenses without throwing a single punch. The rain in Seattle didn't just fall, it persisted, a relentless, whispering curtain that draped the city's towering glass skyscrapers in a perpetual, moody twilight. High above the soaked, chaotic streets, far removed from the wail of sirens and the frantic scramble of ordinary human life, stood the penthouse sanctuary of Lysander Croft. To the world below, he was a shadowy enigma, a reclusive billionaire who owned vast swaths of Pacific Northwest real estate and profitable shipping ports. But to the hidden, terrifying supernatural underworld thriving in the darkness, he was something far more ancient. He was the Vampire King. For over 4 centuries, Lysander had maintained a brutal, fragile order among competing immortals. He was a sovereign woven from absolute authority and chilling detachment, a ruler who commanded obedience not through shouting, but through a terrifying, icy stillness that could freeze the blood in a traitor's veins. His mind was a labyrinth of centuries-old strategies, always calculating, always anticipating betrayal. Yet, on this particular tempestuous autumn evening, the impenetrable fortress of his eternal life was breached by something so impossible it defied all immortal logic. Lysander stepped silently into the biometric, blood-sealed vault located at the very heart of his spire. This was an area strictly forbidden to anyone but the king himself. The chamber housed his most dangerous ancient relics, fragile treaties, and the glowing warding stones that magically protected his territory. It was a lethal space, designed by ancient sorcerers to instantly incinerate any uninvited guest into a pile of fine gray dust. However, as the heavy reinforced titanium doors slid open with a soft mechanical hiss, an unfamiliar, delicate sound echoed against the polished marble walls, shattering the absolute silence. It was rhythmic, soft, and entirely joyful cooing. Every predatory instinct within Lysander's ancient body flared to immediate life. His senses, sharpened by centuries of bloody survival, scanned the vast shadowed room for an elite assassin, a treacherous rogue, or a hidden silver-laced trap. He moved with the fluid, terrifying grace of a hunting panther, sliding through the deep shadows toward the center of the vault. But as his luminescent silver-gray eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, the breath he did not actually need caught sharply in his throat. Sitting calmly in the exact center of an ancient, priceless Persian silk tapestry was a tiny, fragile, mortal infant. The little girl, appearing no more than 8 months old, was completely engrossed in a frayed golden thread dangling from the woven historical masterpiece. Her soft chestnut curls tumbled around a face of unblemished, breathtaking innocence. She wore a faded, slightly worn yellow onesie, a stark, almost comical contrast to the dark, oppressive, gothic grandeur of the executioner's vault surrounding her. When she heard his silent predatory approach, she did not scream in mortal terror. She did not instinctively sense the lethal apex predator towering over her. Instead, she lifted her small head, locked her wide, curious hazel eyes onto his pale, angular, marble-like face, and offered a radiant, gummy, completely toothless smile. She made a joyful, high-pitched babbling sound that echoed strangely in the deadly room. She abandoned the priceless tapestry and began to crawl rapidly toward him, her tiny arms reaching upward as if she had just found the most wonderful comforting treasure in the entire world. Lysander stood completely fr. Ozen. He was a perfectly carved statue of dark lethal elegance in a custom-tailored obsidian black suit that cost more than most mortal families earned in a year. His brilliant, strategic mind, capable of outmaneuvering entire armies of ancient vampires, completely stalled. This child had somehow miraculously bypassed magical wards that would have reduced a lesser vampire to smoldering ash. She had appeared at the exact precarious moment his long reign faced an unprecedented crisis, a crumbling peace treaty with the Cascade Werewolf Pack, a hidden traitor leaking financial secrets, and human hunters circling his borders. Was this smiling child a calculated distraction? A cruel psychological maneuver? And yet, Why did this fragile, warm-blooded, defenseless creature deliberately choose to crawl directly toward the most feared immortal in the region, confidently wrap her tiny, radiating warm fingers around his cold, rigid hand, and completely refuse to let go? A quiet, bewildered breath slipped past Lysander's pale lips. He looked down at the tiny anchoring weight holding his hand hostage, watching in stunned disbelief as her warm, sticky drool began soaking directly into the expensive cuff of his pristine imported silk shirt. It was profoundly, hilariously absurd. Slowly, deliberately, as if moving through a bizarre, forgotten dream, the feared vampire king sank gracefully to his knees. His impossibly expensive trousers brushed the ancient dusty floor, and he found himself sitting cross-legged, leveling his terrifying gaze with the smiling, oblivious infant. "How in the name of the ancients did you bypass the blood wards, little one?" Lysander murmured. His voice was a rich, resonant, hypnotic baritone that usually sent shivers of absolute terror down the spines of his enemies. The baby merely giggled, patting his immaculately tailored knee with a damp, chubby hand. She found the heavy silver cufflink at his wrist and began to tug at it with sheer stubborn determination. Ion. Suddenly, an overpowering, terrible, and highly offensive scent violently assaulted his heightened supernatural senses. Lysander grimaced deeply, instinctively holding his breath as he realized with a wave of profound immortal dread that the child had just created a biological disaster within her diaper. Before he could fully process the sheer, unprecedented indignity of the current situation, the heavy titanium vault doors flew open with a frantic, echoing clatter. A young human woman burst violently into the room. Her delicate face was drained of all natural color, her breath coming in ragged, terrified, hyperventilating gasps. She wore the standard slate-gray uniform of the Spire's nighttime cleaning staff, her dark auburn hair slipping completely from a messy, hurried knot at the nape of her slender neck. "Aurora," she cried out, her voice tearing with pure, unfiltered maternal panic as her frantic emerald eyes swept the vast shadowed room. When her desperate gaze finally landed on Lysander, and she realized exactly whose forbidden domain she had unlawfully entered, she froze completely as if struck by a bolt of lightning. She trembled violently, her knuckles turning white as her hands clutched the rough fabric of her gray apron, but she absolutely did not drop to her knees in supplication. Lysander had seen incredibly powerful ancient immortals grovel pathetically before him, begging tearfully for an ounce of mercy. Yet this fragile, exhausted, mortal woman kept her chin raised in a display of breathtaking defiance. "You know exactly who I am," Lysander stated, the words smooth, chilling, and drifting through the quiet room like a winter breeze. "Yes, Mr. Croft," she answered immediately, her voice shaking uncontrollably, but her bright green eyes fiercely, undeniably protective. "Then why do you not bow before me?" he asked, genuinely deeply curious, his luminescent silver eyes steadying her pale, deeply exhausted face with newfound fascination. The woman S.W. allowed hard, looking desperately at her child, then back at the immortal sovereign. "I only bow to the heavens," she said softly, her voice carrying a quiet, unbreakable strength. "Not to anyone else, no matter how much terrifying power they hold over this city." Lysander stared at her for a very long, tense moment, the silence stretching between them like a physical wire. A soft, deeply unexpected laugh drifted past his lips. A sound so rare it surprised even him. "Fascinating," he whispered into the shadows. "Take your child. She requires a clean garment immediately. Return to your regular duties. We will discuss this unimaginable massive breach of my security tomorrow evening." The woman quickly scooped her infant into her protective arms and vanished into the night, leaving the immortal king completely alone with a lingering, unexplainable warmth. The following evening, the relentless Seattle rain continued its rhythmic, hypnotic drumming against the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows of Lysander's expansive, luxurious private office. He sat silently behind his massive hand-carved oak desk, entirely unable to focus on the myriad of urgent political crises currently demanding his undivided attention. The phantom lingering weight of the child's tiny hand on his cold fingers and the deeply defiant emerald gaze of the mortal mother continually haunted his usually disciplined immortal mind. The heavy mahogany doors chimed softly and Theron stepped deliberately into the room. Theron was Lysander's oldest, most trusted confidant and chief enforcer. A towering, broad-shouldered vampire whose rugged face was heavily mapped with centuries of brutal battle scars. Despite his fearsome, intimidating exterior, Theron possessed a brilliant, sharp investigative mind and an unwavering, absolute loyalty to his chosen sovereign. "I have the complete mortal history you requested, my king," Theron rumbled, his deep voice filling the quiet room as he carefully placed a thick leather-bound dossier onto the polished wood of the desk. "Speak it," Lysander commanded flatly, his silver eyes remaining fixed on the glittering rain-blurred city lights far below. Theron opened the file, his scarred expression turning noticeably grim. Meline Hayes. 26 years of age. Born in a quiet, deeply religious rural town in eastern Oregon. She was brilliant, securing a full, highly competitive academic scholarship to a prestigious university here in Seattle. She possessed a very bright future, but she abandoned her studies and her family's approval entirely for Oliver Hayes. Lysander turned his head slowly, his gaze sharpening. "And where exactly is this husband now?" Theron's expression darkened even further. "Deceased nearly 14 months ago. Official mortal police records claim it was a tragic, unfortunate accident. His vehicle allegedly plunged directly into the Puget Sound during a massive blinding storm. But my deeply embedded sources in the shadows reveal a much darker, sinister truth." Lysander's gaze sharpened instantly into blades of pure ice, the ambient temperature in the grand room dropping so rapidly that frost began to form on the edges of the glass windows. "Explain it to me, Theron." The enforcer sighed, the sound heavy with the exhausting weariness of endless immortal politics. "Oliver Hayes was a senior auditor for a coastal shipping firm we indirectly control through human proxies. He possessed a keen eye and discovered massive undeniable discrepancies in the financial ledgers. Critical funds meant to maintain the peace treaties were being systematically siphoned by Malachi's rogue faction, the Crimson Brotherhood. Oliver, being a mortal of high moral character, threatened to expose the massive embezzlement to the human authorities. 2 days later, though the brake lines on his vehicle were expertly cut." Theron paused, letting the weight of the murder settle in the air. "He left Meline entirely penniless, drowning in evilly fabricated debts deliberately designed to ruin her life and completely alone. Her strict, unforgiving family had disowned her entirely for marrying him in the first place. She gave birth to the child in a severely underfunded charity ward with absolutely no one to hold her hand. Now she works 3 exhausting, backbreaking jobs just to afford rent for a tiny, crumbling apartment." A heavy, suffocating, and incredibly dangerous silence filled the grand office. Lysander stared intensely at the closed file on his desk. Meline had faced the absolute darkest, most unforgiving cruelty of the world, entirely alone and unprotected. Yet she still possessed the incredible raw strength to stand tall and refuse to bow before a lethal creature of the night. At that exact moment, the heavy oak doors eased open with a soft click. Meline stepped hesitantly inside, pushing a battered, loudly squeaking stroller. Lysander had issued a strict, non-negotiable directive earlier that morning. She was permitted and indeed mandated to bring the infant to his private, highly secure wing under the official guise of an ongoing security investigation. Meline lifted a peacefully sleeping Aurora and placed her gently into the crib Lysander had ordered delivered mere hours prior. It was a magnificent, breathtakingly beautiful handcrafted mahogany cradle, carefully lined with the absolute finest organic silk and cotton costing over $5,000. Meline offered a small but deeply hesitant nod of acknowledgement and slipped quickly out of the room to finish her grueling cleaning shift, leaving Lysander entirely alone with the sleeping child. Theron watched in stunned absolute silence as his terrifying, usually emotionless sovereign walked slowly and deliberately toward the expensive crib. Lysander reached out, his long pale index finger hovering just inches over the baby's incredibly soft, flushed cheek. Her mother possesses significantly more courage and resilience than half the science-seasoned warriors currently sitting in my court, Lysander whispered into the stillness, his voice laced with profound, unmistakable respect. She carries the crushing weight of the entire world on those fragile mortal shoulders. Yet she completely and utterly refuses to break Aurora shifted slightly in her deep sleep, her tiny hand reaching out to wrap instinctively and tightly around Lysander's cold finger. The immortal king did not pull away. For the first time in over 4 centuries, the thick, impenetrable ice encasing his dead heart began to genuinely fracture. 3 weeks drifted by in a bizarre, enchanting haze of entirely impossible new routines. The terrifying, severely austere sanctuary of the Vampire King had gradually transformed into something completely unrecognizable to any who knew him. Beside heavy oak shelves holding ancient blood-sealed grimoires and weapons of historical slaughter, there now sat an imported bright wooden high chair from Scandinavia. Hand-stitched, wildly expensive velvet plush toys rested casually against priceless historic tapestries depicting ancient supernatural wars. Every single evening at exactly 8 p.m., Lysander would formally summon Maid and Aurora to his inner office. The official mandate distributed to the staff was still framed as crucial security monitoring, but the entire supernatural court knew it was a thinly veiled, highly amusing excuse. Elena, Lysander's elegant, sharply beautiful, and deeply ambitious vampire secretary, processed the new financial ledgers with mounting silent disgust. Thousands of dollars from the sovereign's accounts were being frivolously spent on artisanal teething rattles, organic fruit purees, and a massive climate-controlled portable nursery. Inside the grand office, the most feared king of the Pacific Northwest sat entirely ungracefully on his priceless Persian rug. A massive stack of vital treaty documents completely abandoned on his desk. Their Aurora sat opposite him, aggressively and happily chewing on the soft ear of a velvet woodland bear. "I have a terrible, highly complex political dilemma, little one," Lysander murmured. His tone was grave, serious, and measured as if he were addressing his ancient, treacherous council of elders. The coastal werewolf treaty was severely compromised last night. Someone residing within my trusted inner circle is secretly feeding our strategic defense positions to Malachi's rogue faction. I cannot easily see the traitor hiding in the dark. Aurora blinked her wide, innocent hazel eyes, offering a wet, enthusiastic babbling sound before tossing her velvet bear entirely across the room with a joyful high-pitched squeal. Lysander nodded solemnly, retrieving the toy with supernatural speed. "I agree completely with your assessment. Malachi is acting entirely too bold lately. His reckless ambitions will ruin the fragile necessary peace we have meticulously built." Maid stood completely frozen outside the slightly parted heavy doors, her hand hovering nervously over the polished brass handle. She had come to fetch Aurora for her evening meal, but the bizarre heartwarming sight before her stole her breath entirely. The immortal ruler, a legendary being of lethal power, endless shadows, and countless confirmed kills, was engaging in an earnest, deeply focused political discourse with a babbling, messy infant. And then he smiled. It was not the calculating, cold, predatory smirk she had seen him direct at his wealthy, mortal associates, or his terrified supernatural subordinates. It was a soft, breathtakingly gentle, and entirely genuine smile that made his ageless, intimidating features appear devastatingly human. Maid's weary heart performed a strange, erratic, and deeply frightening flutter against her ribs. She stepped backward quickly into the deep shadows of the long corridor, her mind reeling with a terrifying, confusing warmth she desperately wanted to deny. Down in the subterranean brightly lit break room, Beatrice, a veteran head cleaner in her late 60s, poured Maid a large cup of steaming fragrant chamomile tea. Beatrice was a formidable, highly observant woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed absolutely nothing that occurred within the massive supernatural household. "You are playing a highly dangerous, incredibly foolish game, child," Beatrice warned, her voice exceptionally low and laced with genuine maternal concern. "I have served these immortals for over 30 years. They are beings of the absolute hunt. They do not ever change their fundamental nature. I see exactly how you look at him, and I see how he looks at that precious baby. But you must remember, he is a creature of the endless night. Do not let your lonely, grieving heart forget what he truly is." Maid stared intensely into her tea, letting the comforting warmth seep into her tired, calloused hands. "He is different when he is with her, Beatrice. He is so incredibly, surprisingly gentle. Beatrice sighed heavily, shaking her graying head. Gentleness from an apex predator is just a different, highly deceptive kind of snare. Protect your child, Meline. And more importantly, protect your own fragile heart. The midnight hour smoothly draped the restless city in a thick, impenetrable blanket of coastal fog, turning the iconic Seattle skyline into a hazy painting of blurred, softly glowing embers. Inside the grand luxurious office, the only reliable light came from the wildly dancing orange flames of the massive stone fireplace and the soft, concentrated glow of a single brass desk lamp. Aurora was currently fast asleep in her expensive mahogany crib, safely clutching the velvet woodland bear tightly to her small chest. Meline stood awkwardly before Lysander's massive desk, her hands clasped so tightly in front of her that her knuckles were entirely white. He had specifically requested her continued presence long after her exhausting cleaning shift had officially ended, and the serious, heavy, unreadable look in his silver eyes told her this was absolutely not a casual, friendly summons. The thick air between them was heavy with unspoken words, crackling loudly with an invisible magnetic tension that made Meline's breath grow remarkably shallow. "Tell me everything about your husband, Meline," Lysander requested gently, his voice a low, velvety, hypnotic rumble that seemed to physically wrap around her in the dim, intimate light of the room. Meline flinched visibly, entirely unprepared to violently pry open a deep, festering wound that still bled so freely in the quiet, lonely hours of the night. She looked desperately toward the crib, drawing necessary strength from the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of her young daughter's chest. "Oliver was an incredibly kind man," she began, her voice trembling slightly before finding its solid footing. "We met by pure chance at the university library. He was studying advanced accounting, and I was studying classic literature. He looked at me as if I were the absolute most important person in the entire world. When we decided to marry, my strict family completely cut all ties with me. They loudly declared I was throwing my life away. But we were so happy, even when we had absolutely nothing but a tiny, freezing studio apartment and a massive mountain of student loans." Hot tears gathered thickly in Meline's emerald eyes, vividly reflecting the dancing firelight, but she stubbornly refused to let them fall down her cheeks. "Then you found a new high-paying job at the coastal shipping firm. He started working incredibly late hours, coming home pale, sweating, and completely terrified. He would not tell me exactly what was wrong, only that he had found something terrible, something massive in the financial ledgers. He said he was going to report it to the human authorities to protect us." She swallowed hard, a painful, jagged lump forming deep in her throat. 2 days later, the city police knocked loudly on my door. They told me his car had skidded off a wet road directly into the Sound. They officially ruled it a tragic, unavoidable accident. But Oliver was the absolute most careful, paranoid driver in the world. I knew someone intentionally killed him. I knew it in my bones, but I had absolutely no proof, no money, and no one to turn to for help. I gave birth to Aurora in a crowded charity ward, completely alone, but terrified that whoever killed Oliver would inevitably come for us next. Lysander remained perfectly, terrifyingly still, absorbing every single agonizing detail of her tragic story. The protective rage rapidly building within his broad chest was a cold, absolute, and highly destructive fury. He knew the undeniable truth now. The Crimson Brotherhood, led by the treacherous, greedy Malachi, had brutally murdered a good, completely honest man simply because Oliver refused to be quietly corrupted by the overwhelming darkness. Malachi had intentionally destroyed this innocent woman's life, forced her into crushing poverty, and left a child permanently fatherless, all to secretly fund a bloody rebellion against the vampire crown. Lysander stood up slowly, moving with liquid grace, stepping around the massive desk until he was standing just mere inches away from Meline. He reached out slowly, his cool, pale, incredibly strong fingers gently brushing away a stray, rebellious tear that had finally escaped her eye and traced down her cheek. The touch was incredibly tender, a massive, shocking contrast to the lethal, world-ending power visibly thrumming just beneath his pale skin. "Your husband was a remarkably brave, deeply honorable man, Meline," Lysander said, his voice dropping to a fierce, solemn, and incredibly serious whisper. He died because he was fundamentally good. He completely refused to look away from the creeping darkness, and he died trying desperately to protect you and your future. You are not crazy, and you are absolutely no longer alone in this world. I know exactly who ordered his brutal death. Meline looked up at him, her breath catching violently at the intense, deeply protective fire burning wildly in his silver eyes. I promise you upon my long immortal life and the ancient sacred blood flowing in my veins, Lysander vowed, his measured words carrying the heavy, unbreakable weight of a centuries-old royal oath. I will meticulously uncover every single shadow of this massive conspiracy. I will bring absolute unmitigated ruin to the monsters who took him from you. No one will ever harm you or Aurora again. In that quiet, profoundly shifting moment, Meline looked directly at the feared vampire king and saw absolutely no trace of a monster. She saw only a fiercely devoted, incredibly powerful protector. And for the very first time in 14 agonizing months, she felt completely wonderfully safe. The Grand Council chamber, hidden deep beneath the towering glass and steel spire in Seattle, was a breathtaking marvel of ancient, terrifying architecture. Carved directly into the subterranean bedrock centuries before the mortal city above had even been named. The cavernous room was illuminated solely by the flickering amber light of suspended iron braziers. Massive pillars of polished obsidian stretched upward, losing themselves in the oppressive shadows of the vaulted ceiling. Around an immense circular table forged from a single slab of petrified wood sat the 12 ruling elders of the Pacific Northwest immortal factions. They were the most lethal beings to walk the earth. Predators draped in the deceptive elegance of tailored silk and velvet. At the head of this assembly sat Lysander Croft, the Midnight Sovereign. His expression was carved from glacial ice, his silver eyes reflecting the dancing flames as he surveyed the treacherous faces of his allies. Standing at the opposite end was Darius, the arrogant ambassador for the Crimson Brotherhood, a rogue faction. He possessed a cruel, calculating smile. The era of hiding like beasts in the shadows has come to an end, my king, Darius proclaimed, his voice echoing against the stone walls. I present the Vanguard Doctrine, an initiative to infiltrate mortal financial institutions and political offices. For over 300 years, we have bowed to the restrictions of the peace treaties. It is time we claim absolute dominion over Seattle. A dangerous murmur rippled through the elders. Lysander did not move. The peace treaties are the foundation of our survival, Darius, Lysander stated, his baritone voice slicing through the noise. Arrogance leads to exposure, and exposure leads to annihilation. The Vanguard Doctrine is a suicidal endeavor born of Malachi's greed. Before Darius could incite a rebellion, a sound alien to the dark history of the chamber shattered the atmosphere. A musical, fearless giggle. The massive oak doors creaked open and Meline stumbled into the light, her face pale with terror, clutching a babbling Aurora. I am so sorry, Your Grace, Meline gasped as the predatory gaze of 12 vampires snapped toward her. She escaped the playroom. She kept crying for you. Every immortal stared in stunned silence as the dreaded king rose. He did not execute the mortal for the intrusion. Instead, Lysander walked gracefully toward Meline, his cold expression softening, and he lifted Aurora into his arms, and she contentedly rested her head on his shoulder. Lysander walked back to the table, setting the infant onto the polished wood. He produced 2 heavy parchments, the Vanguard Doctrine and the Peace Accords. The Council requires a decision, Lysander announced. The Doctrine or the Accords? Aurora stared at the parchments, offered a ha. PPYQ, and reached out. She grabbed the Vanguard Doctrine, crumpled it in her tiny fists, and ripped it down the middle, shoving a corner into her mouth to chew. She then patted the peace accords with her other hand. The silence was deafening. Lysander looked up at Darius with a mocking smile. The crown has made its irrevocable decision. The peace remains. Test my patience again, Darius, and you will meet the sun before dawn. The aftermath of the council meeting left a suffocating blanket of tension over the spire. Meline rushed through the corridors, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had retrieved Aurora the second Lysander dismissed the elders, her mind echoing with warnings. She was a fragile mortal in a den of predators. As she hurried past the darkened archives, a hushed, frantic whisper drifted through a door left ajar. It was Elena, Lysander's trusted secretary, speaking into an enchanted mirror. "Malachi, the plan is falling apart," Elena hissed. "The king is distracted by the human and her child. The embezzlement records Oliver Hayes discovered. I have kept them hidden. But Lysander is asking questions. We must strike during the lunar eclipse. Assassinate his loyalists. And you will rule." Meline's breath caught. A sickening realization crashed over her. Oliver, her devoted husband, had not died in an accident. Malachi's faction had murdered him to protect their treason, and Elena was the traitor who had facilitated it. The shadows in the hallway seemed to reach for her. She pulled Aurora tighter, backing away blindly, but a floorboard groaned beneath her shoe. The whispering stopped. Meline did not wait. She sprinted down the hallway, her pulse roaring, propelled by the instinct of a mother protecting her child. She bypassed the elevators and pushed through the emergency stairwell, descending dozens of flights in a blind panic. She burst out into the relentless Seattle rain, disappearing into the chaotic streets. Hours later, the storm raged. With intensity. Inside the spire, Lysander stepped into his office with a warm bottle of milk. The mahogany crib was empty. The small velvet bear lay abandoned on the floor. A cold dread seized his chest. He moved with supernatural speed through the penthouse. Nothing. Theron, his enforcer, appeared in the doorway. "She fled into the storm, my king." Lysander's eyes darkened to the color of a violent sea. The realization that she had run in terror from him shattered his composure. He did not summon his guards. The Midnight Sovereign threw open the glass doors of his balcony and leapt into the roaring tempest, plunging into the dark city below, letting his instincts guide him through the concrete labyrinth to find the family he never knew he needed. The dilapidated apartment building stood in a neglected district. Beatrice, the head cleaner, lived on the 4th floor. When Meline had pounded on her door, soaking wet and sobbing, Beatrice had pulled them inside. Now Meline sat wrapped in a wool blanket, staring at a mug of tea while Aurora slept. "You cannot outrun them, child," Beatrice said softly. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted. A rhythmic authoritative knock echoed at the door. Beatrice opened it to find Lysander standing in the filthy hallway, his dark coat soaked, his silver eyes locking onto Meline. Beatrice quietly slipped into the bedroom, leaving them alone. "You ran from me," Lysander whispered, his voice cracking with an emotion he had not felt in 4 centuries. He walked toward her, rainwater dripping from his coat. "I thought I had lost the only light in my existence." Meline pulled the blanket tighter. "I had to run. I heard Elena talking to Malachi. She confessed to murdering Oliver. They are planning to assassinate you. I am just a human, Lysander. I cannot survive among monsters." Lysander stopped just inches from her. To her shock, the feared king sank slowly to his knees on the dirty floor. He reached out, his pale hands in compass. Her trembling ones. "I swear to you, Meline, I will make Elena pay for every tear you have shed. Do not run again. I offer you my protection, my heart, and my entire existence. Come home. Let me be the shield that guards you from the dark." Looking at the ancient king kneeling before her, Meline felt the walls around her heart crumble. She saw the absolute sincerity in his eyes. She dropped to her knees and threw her arms around his neck. Lysander caught her fiercely, pulling her against his cold chest. And 3 days later, the subterranean amphitheater was opened for a tribunal. Elena and Darius knelt in the center, bound by blood magic. Lysander stood upon a raised dais holding a massive silver sword. "You orchestrated the murder of a mortal man and conspired to shatter the peace," Lysander's voice resonated like thunder. "The punishment is absolute obliteration." He raised the blade, but a soft voice echoed from the gates. "Lysander, please stop." Meline stepped out of the shadows, her emerald eyes fixed on him. To interrupt a tribunal was a capital offense. Yet Lysander lowered his blade. Meline stopped at the base of the dais. "They took my husband," she said, her voice echoing through the silent cavern. "But if you execute them, you remain the monster they want you to be. Aurora loves you. She sees a protector, not a killer. Please do not carry more death in your heart. Let the cycle of violence end tonight." Lysander stared at her, then at the sword. Slowly, he handed the weapon to Theron. "You will not meet the blade," he declared to the traitors. "Instead, you are stripped of your fangs and banished to the frozen wastelands, forever exiled. You owe your existence to the mercy of a human woman." 2 years flowed by in a blur of joy. Meline completed her degree in literature and established a foundation for struggling single mothers. Lysander stepped back from absolute rule, choosing to read poetry to Aurora by the fire. On a crisp autumn evening, beneath a canopy of willow trees and floating lanterns, they were wed. It was a ceremony bridging day and night. Aurora, a vibrant toddler, served as the flower girl, enthusiastically hurling rose petals at the guests. As Lysander slipped a ring of braided silver onto Meline's finger, he kissed her beneath the fading sun, sealing a bond that transcended time. The following morning, the Croft family stood outside the gates of Seattle's most prestigious preschool. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine. Lysander wore a casual sweater, looking like a normal, handsome father rather than a sovereign of the night. Meline held his hand, her heart swelling with happiness. Aurora, wearing a yellow raincoat and a bear-shaped backpack, bounced on her heels. She turned and threw her arms around Lysander's legs. "I love you, Papa," she chirped. Lysander scooped her up, his silver eyes shining. "I love you, too, my little light. Be brave today." He set her down and they watched as she skipped through the school doors, stepping into a future they had fought to secure. Life is a vast, unpredictable journey, frequently forcing us to navigate through deep valleys of profound darkness and despair. Yet the true essence of our existence is not defined by the shadows we endure, but by the radiant light we choose to embrace when it unexpectedly flickers into our weary lives. As humans, we often build towering fortresses of rigid routine around ourselves, guarding our hearts with walls of logic and fear, convinced that isolation is the only safety. However, isolation is merely a different form of captivity. True strength is found not in closing ourselves off, but in possessing the boundless courage to open our hearts to the vulnerable and the unexpected. A hardened spirit can be transformed by the simplest act of pure, unconditional trust. Whether it is the innocent reach of a child, the unwavering gaze of a soul who refuses to be broken, or the quiet forgiveness offered in the face of betrayal. These are the forces that possess the ability to rewrite our destinies. Forgiveness is the ultimate liberation. It does not erase the pain of the past, but it releases the heavy chains of bitterness, allowing us to step forward unburdened by the ghosts of vengeance. When we choose compassion over retribution, we elevate our own humanity, healing not only those around us, but the deepest wounds within our own souls. Ultimately, family is not defined by bloodlines or the worlds we originate from. True family is forged in shared grief and laughter that breaks the silence, and in the promise to stand together when the storms arrive. It is the realization that no one is beyond redemption and no one is destined to wander the eternal night alone. If we keep our hearts open, even the most frozen landscapes of our souls can thaw, making way for a resilient love that endures beyond time, bringing healing, purpose, and unshakable peace to our lives. Such is the legacy of a king who learned to love and a mother who dared to forgive. Proving that even in the heart of darkness, light will always find a way to bloom.